For 4,000 years, the rift consumed every civilization that challenged it. Then humans did something far more dangerous than entering the darkness. They decided to bring everyone back. There are places in the universe that earn names. Places of beauty, places of triumph, places where history bends and civilizations rise. And then there are places that earn warnings. The rift was one of those places. It began where every star chart ended. Not gradually, not uncertainly, abruptly, as though someone had taken the fabric of the galaxy itself and sliced it open with a blade too large for minds to comprehend. Across nearly 12,000 light years stretched a darkness unlike any ever recorded. No stars shine within it. No radiation escape from it. No gravitational patterns behave correctly around it. The rift did not simply exist inside the universe. It appeared to reject the universe entirely. Long-range sensors returned contradictions. Distances changed between observations. Objects near its borders appeared in multiple locations at once. Light itself occasionally arrived before it had been emitted. The oldest records described it as a wound. The youngest scientists described it as impossible. Neither description was entirely wrong. For 4,136 standard years, every civilization that approached the rift encountered the same truth. Nothing returned. Exploration drones vanished. Research vessels disappeared. Military expeditions entered and were never heard from again. The losses accumulated slowly at first. A single ship, then 3, then entire flotillas. Curiosity became caution. Caution became fear. Fear eventually became law. The Galactic Assembly classified the region as permanently forbidden space. The decision passed unanimously. No one objected, because by then every major civilization had already lost someone to it. The memorial station orbiting the border of Sector 912 became the largest cemetery in known space. It contained no bodies, only names, millions of names, names carved into crystal walls that stretched for kilometers beneath artificial sunlight. Entire species visited the station to remember explorers who had walked willingly into darkness. Children learned those names in schools. Pilots memorized them in academies. Historians recited them during remembrance ceremonies. The names served as a warning. Some boundaries existed for a reason. Commander Viren of the Killer Dominion stood before those walls now. The old soldier had visited many battlefields throughout his 2 centuries of service. He had watched moons burn. He had witnessed empires collapse. He had survived wars that altered star maps forever. Yet nowhere in the galaxy unsettled him as much as this silent hallway. Because battlefields told stories of conflict, the memorial wall told stories of questions that never received answers. His eyes moved slowly across the names. A K-layer exploration cruiser, lost 2,000 years earlier. A diplomatic convoy from the Talon Republic, gone without explanation. An entire scientific habitat carrying 6,000 researchers, vanished. No debris, no distress calls, no evidence. Simply gone. Viren reached one clawed hand toward a familiar inscription. The vessel Dawnseeker. His brother had served aboard that ship 112 years ago. Officially, the Kalar Dominion declared the crew dead after 12 months without contact. Unofficially, families never stopped looking toward the stars. Behind him, footsteps echoed softly through the chamber. Human footsteps. Viren turned. The woman approaching wore the dark blue uniform of the Terran Exploration Authority. Her expression carried the same mixture of curiosity and sorrow that he had come to associate with humans. They looked at memorials differently than most species, not as endings, as unfinished stories. "Commander Viren?" she asked gently. He nodded. "You are Captain Elena Torres." "That's right." She stopped beside him, studying the endless wall of names. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, she asked quietly, "Did you know someone here?" Viren stared at the inscription. "My brother." She followed his gaze. Neither offered condolences. Humans had an unusual understanding of silence. Sometimes silence respected grief more than words ever could. Eventually, she spoke. "We're going in tomorrow." Viren looked toward her sharply. Even after weeks of preparation, even after endless assembly debates, hearing the words spoken aloud still felt absurd. The humans were actually going to do it. They advised against this, he said. They did. They explained the risks. They did. They showed you these names. Captain Torres nodded. They did that too. Vieira folded his arms. Then why proceed? The answer came immediately. Because someone might still be alive. The commander stared at her. For a moment, he wondered if translation software had failed. Captain, some of these ships disappeared thousands of years ago. I know. No species can survive isolated for that long. Probably not. Then why? Torres looked toward the endless memorial wall. Because probably isn't the same as impossible.
My brother.
The old commander said
May
nothing.
You find peace
because that
in the
sentence
nebula.
Explained humanity better than entire libraries ever had. Most species learn to respect impossible things. Humans challenge them, sometimes recklessly, sometimes brilliantly, often both simultaneously. News of the mission spread across the assembly worlds faster than expected. The reactions were predictable. The Varel Collective called it irresponsible. The Hesh Trade Alliance called it wasteful. Military analysts estimated a 99.8% probability of total loss. Some commentators accused humanity of arrogance. Others accused them of recklessness, disguised as optimism. One particularly famous editorial asked a question repeated across hundreds of worlds. When every civilization agrees something cannot be done, what gives humanity the right to disagree? Human responses were remarkably consistent. We're not saying you're wrong. We're saying we'd like to check. Preparations continued. The expedition fleet assembled slowly above Memorial Station 9. 5 vessels in total. The exploration carrier Odyssey, the research ship Horizon, 2 escort frigates, and a medical support vessel named Mercy. The names alone unsettled the assembly. Most species named ships after victories. Humans named ships after aspirations. 3,000 personnel volunteered. Only 600 positions existed. Psychological evaluations eliminated candidates motivated by glory. Humanity had learned difficult lessons about explorers seeking fame. The final crews shared something else instead. Curiosity, hope, and an almost irrational belief that mysteries existed to be solved. On the evening before departure, representatives from 23 civilizations gathered in the assembly chamber overlooking the rift itself. The view dominated the room. A window hundreds of meters tall displayed the impossible darkness beyond. Stars simply ended. One moment the galaxy existed. The next moment it didn't. No transition. No fading. Only absence. Assembly Speaker Thal addressed the gathering. No civilization has ever crossed this boundary and returned. His voice echoed through the chamber. Tomorrow humanity will attempt what thousands before them could not. He paused. We gather not to celebrate. The silence deepened. We gather to remember courage. Captain Elena Torres stood among her crew. She looked less like someone attending a ceremony and more like someone waiting for a train. Calm, focused, ready. Speaker Thal turned toward her. Captain Torres, humanity still has time to reconsider. She smiled politely. Thank you, Speaker. That was not an answer. It was the polite version of the answer. Laughter spread quietly through the chamber. Even Thal's translator struggled to interpret human humor correctly. The speaker lowered his head slightly. Then may the stars guide your journey. Torres glanced toward the window, toward the darkness, toward the impossible. That's kind of the problem, she said softly. The stars stopped halfway. Hours later, the Odyssey drifted silently within its launch cradle. Crew members moved through final preparations. Navigation systems checked and rechecked calculations no one trusted. Medical teams prepared for emergencies they could not predict. Engineers inspected components that might soon operate beyond the laws of known physics. Captain Torres stood alone on the observation deck. The rift filled the entire viewport. For the first time since arriving, she understood fear. Not fear of dying. Explorers accepted that possibility long ago. This was different. This was a fear of standing before something so vast that human understanding seemed almost insulting by comparison. Footsteps approached behind her. Chief Engineer Malik Rahman held 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this. She accepted one gratefully. Can't sleep either? He laughed. Captain, tomorrow we're driving directly into a cosmic horror story. He raised his cup. I think insomnia is reasonable. For a while they stood in silence. Finally Malik spoke. Do you think we'll find anything? Torres considered the question carefully. Then she smiled. I think we'll find answers. He nodded slowly. And if the answer is that everyone died? She looked back toward the darkness. Then at least their families won't spend another 1,000 years wondering. The launch alarm sounded through the ship. Across the station, thousands gathered near observation windows. Some came to witness history. Others came to witness tragedy. Many weren't sure there was a difference. The Odyssey detached first, then Horizon, then the remaining ships followed. 5 tiny lights moving toward the edge of existence itself. Assembly channels broadcast the event live to hundreds of worlds. Entire cities watched in silence. No speeches, no music, only the quiet hum of engines pushing humanity toward the oldest mystery in known space. Captain Torres settled into her command chair. Status: formation holding. Communications stable. Navigation ready. She nodded. Approach boundary. The stars outside began to disappear. Not fade, disappear, as though erased by an invisible hand. The crew watched in silence. Nobody had prepared for how wrong the rift would feel. Space was supposed to contain stars. Without them, the universe looked unfinished. Boundary in 30 seconds, navigation reported. Torres took one final look behind them, at the galaxy, at home, at certainty. Then she faced forward. Proceed. The Odyssey crossed first. Sensors screamed. Gravity twisted. Reality itself seemed to hesitate. For one impossible moment, Captain Elena Torres could have sworn she saw stars reflected inside the darkness. Not ahead of them. Inside it, waiting. Then the universe vanished, and humanity entered the rift. Behind them, across the assembly worlds, every signal disappeared. The fleet was gone. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then someone at Memorial Station whispered the words history would remember forever. They actually did it. Nobody yet understood the significance of what had happened, because the galaxy believed it had just witnessed 600 humans disappear into oblivion. In truth, the story was only beginning. For several seconds after crossing the boundary, nobody aboard the Odyssey spoke. Not because they were afraid, because language itself suddenly felt inadequate. The universe outside the viewports no longer made sense. Stars were there, and yet they weren't. Constellations twisted as if reflected in moving water. Entire fields of distant suns shimmered and shifted positions whenever someone looked away and looked back again. Navigation displays flickered with warnings that contradicted one another. Distance estimates changed every few seconds. One system reported the nearest object was 30 light years away. Another insisted it was less than a kilometer. A third refused to display anything at all. Captain Elena Torres stared at the sensor readings in silence. Report. Lieutenant Sato looked up from his station. Honestly, Captain? Please. I have absolutely no idea what I'm looking at. That earned a few nervous laughs across the bridge. Humor, the oldest defense mechanism in human history. If people were still joking, panic hadn't won yet. Communications? Torres asked. Local channels operational. And the assembly? The communications officer hesitated. Nothing. Signal obstruction? No, Captain. The officer swallowed. It's more like the signals have nowhere to go. Nobody liked the sound of that. The Odyssey had crossed impossible distances before. Communication delays were normal. Signal interference was normal. This wasn't either of those. It felt as though the universe behind them had simply ceased to exist. The Horizon reported similar conditions. So did the escorts. So did the Mercy. The fleet remained together. For now, that mattered. Proceed at 1/4 speed, Torres ordered. Nobody wins any awards for being the first people vaporized by unknown physics. This time the laughter came easier. The fleet moved forward. Or at least they believed they moved forward. Outside, the darkness slowly began to change. At first it was subtle, a faint glow in the distance. Then another, then dozens. Eventually, the crew realized what they were seeing. Stars. Real stars. Not distortions. Not reflections. Entire star systems hidden within the rift itself. The bridge fell silent once more. "Impossible," whispered Sato. Captain Torres shook her head. "No." She stared at the display. Impossible was finding stars here at all. The first world they discovered orbited a dying red sun. The planet itself was barren and frozen. Cities covered its surface. Massive cities. Their towers stretched kilometers into the sky. Their roads crossed continents. Their oceans reflected the remains of impossible engineering. Every structure was dark. Every system silent. No lights. No movement. No life signs. A civilization had lived there once. A civilization large enough to reshape an entire planet. Now all that remained were ruins beneath ancient snow. The crew watched in silence. Someone had built those cities believing they had a future. Someone had watched children grow there. Someone had looked toward the stars and wondered what waited beyond them. Now there was only silence. The fleet continued. The second discovery was worse. Ships, thousands of ships. They drifted together near the remains of a shattered moon. Military vessels, science ships, exploration cruisers. Different designs, different technologies, different civilizations. All floating side by side. All dead. Captain Torres recognized one immediately. The Dawn Seeker. Commander Villarin's brother's ship. The vessel missing for more than a century. It drifted peacefully among the others, as if sleeping. The bridge became very quiet. Life signs. Negative. Power? Minimal emergency systems only. Torres stood slowly. Prepare boarding teams. The boarding party moved through the corridors of the Dawn Seeker carefully. Emergency lights cast long shadows across abandoned hallways. There were no signs of violence. No battle damage. No decompression. No destruction. The crew quarters were untouched. Meals remained on tables. Personal belongings sat exactly where their owners had left them. It looked as though everyone had simply stood up and walked away. Then they found the records. Captain Torres listened to the final log entry in silence. The image flickered to life. A K-layer officer appeared on screen. Exhausted. Older than he should have been. "We have attempted departure 32 times. He looked away briefly. "The rift changes every route." His voice shook. "Every direction eventually returns us here." Behind him, crew members worked in silence. Not the focused silence of professionals. The defeated silence of people running out of hope. Supplies dwindled. Morale collapsed. Arguments increased. The officer looked directly into the recording device. "If anyone receives this message," he hesitated, "tell our families we tried to come home." The recording ended. Nobody spoke for several moments. Finally, one of the Marines asked quietly, "How old is this recording?" The answer arrived seconds later. 3 days. Every person in the room froze. "That's impossible." The technician checked again. The answer didn't change. 3 days. Not 100 years. 3. Captain Torres felt cold spread through her chest. Time moved differently inside the rift. Outside, a century had passed. Inside, only days. The implications were staggering. Commander Villarin's brother might not be dead. Thousands of missing explorers might not be dead. Entire civilizations could still be alive somewhere inside the darkness. "Captain?" Torres turned toward the technician. "We found something else." The message was simple. Coordinates. Repeated hundreds of times. A destination. A place called Haven. The fleet altered course immediately. 3 days later they found it. The first living city beyond the rift. It floated within the atmosphere of a gas giant illuminated by artificial suns. Millions lived there. Species from across the galaxy. Species believed extinct. Species missing for centuries. Children played in public squares. Markets operated normally. Gardens covered entire districts. The city wasn't surviving. It was living. The arrival of human ships caused chaos. Emergency sirens echoed through the station. Crowds gathered near observation decks. People stared at the newcomers with expressions somewhere between fear and disbelief. Because no new arrivals had entered the rift in nearly 80 years, and nobody had ever arrived willingly. A delegation greeted the humans inside the docking chamber. Their leader belonged to a species nobody recognized. Tall, silver-skinned, ancient eyes carrying burdens older than some civilizations. "You crossed the boundary voluntarily?" she asked. Captain Torres nodded. The woman stared at her. "Why?" The answer came automatically. "We thought someone might need help." The silence that followed seemed to consume the room. Eventually the woman spoke again. "My name is Sereth." She looked toward the human delegation. "You should know something." Her voice became softer. "Everyone who arrives here asks how to survive." She met Torres' eyes directly. "You are the first to ask who is still alive." Over the following weeks, the truth emerged piece by piece. The rift did not destroy ships. It captured them. The moment vessels crossed the boundary, pathways through space changed. Every attempt to leave simply redirected travelers deeper inside. Entire civilizations had become trapped over thousands of years. Some adapted, some collapsed, some disappeared entirely. None escaped. The oldest record spoke of countless rescue attempts. Everyone failed. Eventually, rescue missions stopped coming. Hope followed shortly after. Captain Torres stood beside one of Haven's observation windows. Outside, thousands of ships drifted peacefully around the station. An entire civilization built from people history had forgotten. Sereth joined her. "You're wondering if escape is possible." Torres nodded. "Is it?" The older woman looked toward the stars. "When I arrived here, my people still believed rescue would come." "How long ago was that?" 612 years. Torres said nothing. Sarah smiled sadly. "The answer to your question is no." Humans had encountered that word many times throughout history. No. Heavier than air flight is impossible. No. Crossing oceans cannot be done. No. Machines will never reach the moon. No. Stars are forever beyond our reach. Human history had a complicated relationship with the word no. Captain Torres looked back toward the endless darkness beyond the station. Then she asked the question every trapped civilization had eventually stopped asking. "How many escape attempts have there been?" Sereth looked surprised. "Thousands." "How many involve 600 humans who haven't learned to quit yet?" For the first time in many years, Sereth laughed. Not because the idea was funny, because she had forgotten what determination sounded like. Far away, hidden deep within the impossible geometry of the rift, something moved. Sensors aboard abandoned stations briefly activated. Ancient monitoring arrays awakened for the first time in centuries. Patterns shifted. Pathways changed. As if the rift itself had noticed something unusual. Hope had entered the prison. And hope, unlike ships and signals, had a way of traveling farther than anyone expected. Back in known space, 3 months passed. Memorial preparations quietly began. The assembly discussed wording for official statements. Families gathered beneath walls of crystal names. Commander Vieira visited the memorial again. His hand rested against the inscription of the Dawn Seeker. He wondered if his brother had been afraid. He wondered if he had suffered. He wondered if he had known someone would remember him. Then an alarm echoed across the station. Communication systems activated. Operators shouted. Screens flickered to life. A signal had emerged from the rift. Weak, distorted, impossible. The message contained only 7 words. Found survivors. Beginning rescue operations immediately. The station fell silent, because every civilization in history had prepared itself for one possibility: failure. Nobody had prepared for hope. And somewhere beyond the darkness between stars, humanity had just changed the rules. The signal changed everything, not because it carried strategic value, not because it contained coordinates, not even because it proved humanity was alive. It changed everything because of a single word: survivors. For 4,000 years, the galaxy had spoken about the rift using the language of death. Lost fleets, missing expeditions, permanent disappearances, memorial ceremonies. The possibility that anyone had survived had slowly faded from cultural memory itself. And then humanity had crossed the boundary and casually informed the galaxy that there were survivors. Not victims. Not bodies. Survivors. The assembly replayed the message more than 300 times during the first day. Every translation matrix reached the same conclusion. There was no misunderstanding, no error, no mistranslation. Humanity had found life where the galaxy expected graves. Inside the rift, however, celebrations were brief, because finding the trapped civilizations had only answered one question. The more important question remained. How do you get home? Captain Elena Torres stood before a projection table aboard the Odyssey. Around her floated hundreds of failed escape attempts recorded over centuries. Flight paths twisted through impossible geometries. Navigation routes looped back on themselves. Some expeditions had traveled for years only to arrive exactly where they started. Others vanished completely. The oldest records simply ended mid-transmission. The room remained silent. Finally, Chief Engineer Malik Rahman leaned back in his chair. So the official scientific conclusion is... He pointed toward the display. The universe hates us. A few tired laughs echoed through the room. That is one interpretation, Torres replied. It's my favorite interpretation. Dr. Evelyn Park shook her head. No. She zoomed in on dozens of overlapping trajectories. Look at this. The room leaned closer. None of these routes fail randomly. Malik frowned. They look pretty random to me. They change, she said, but they change consistently. The room grew quiet. Dr. Park highlighted several routes attempted centuries apart, despite different ships, different species, different technologies. The failures looked strangely familiar, almost predictable. It reacts. Torres looked up. You're saying the rift responds to us? Dr. Park hesitated. I'm saying it behaves less like a location. She looked toward the stars beyond the viewport, and more like a system. That idea spread through Haven quickly. Most residents dismissed it immediately. The rift wasn't a machine. It wasn't alive. It wasn't thinking. It was simply reality behaving incorrectly. That had been the accepted explanation for generations. Humanity accepted the explanation, then started questioning it anyway. Because human curiosity had always possessed an unfortunate habit. It rarely stopped where common sense suggested it should. Within weeks, human researchers established laboratories throughout Haven. Physicists studied gravitational distortions. Mathematicians rebuilt navigation models from the ground up. Engineers designed probes specifically intended to fail. That confused nearly everyone. You built a probe to crash? Sareth asked. Malik nodded proudly. 32 of them. Why? Because failure contains information. The silver-skinned woman stared at him. You are disappointed when experiments succeed less than expected? Frequently. You celebrate failures? Only the interesting ones. Sareth slowly shook her head. Your species is deeply concerning. Thank you. The first probe launched 2 days later. It traveled exactly 6,000 kilometers before disappearing from sensors. 7 minutes later it reappeared, behind the launch platform. The second probe attempted a different route. It returned upside down. The third came back broadcasting signals that would not be invented for another 200 years. The fourth simply vanished forever. Human scientists declared the experiment an overwhelming success. The trapped civilizations questioned human sanity. 3 months passed. Then 6. Failure followed failure. Pathways collapsed. Equations broke. Predictions failed. More than once, the Odyssey returned to Haven despite traveling continuously away from it for over a week. The rift bent distance casually. Mockingly, one expedition reported watching a star rise and set 3 times in a single hour. Another discovered an abandoned station before realizing they hadn't built it yet. Time itself seemed negotiable inside the darkness. Eventually, frustration spread to the human teams. Not surrender, never surrender, but frustration. Captain Torres found Dr. Park alone in one of Haven's gardens. The scientist stared silently at flowing water beneath artificial sunlight. I've checked the numbers 100 times, she said quietly. The equations aren't wrong. Torres sat beside her. Then what's missing? Dr. Park looked up. I think we're asking the wrong questions. That sentence changed everything. The breakthrough arrived from the least expected place imaginable, not from physics, not from engineering, not from navigation. Botany. Dr. Maya Singh specialized in plant adaptation in extreme environments. Her laboratory studied crops capable of growing inside the unusual conditions of the rift. Most people consider the work important but unrelated. Then she noticed something impossible. The plants near anxious researchers grew differently than identical plants near relaxed crews. Not slightly differently, dramatically differently. Growth patterns changed. Cell structures altered. Even root systems adapted according to the emotional state of nearby humans. At first she assumed contamination, then equipment failure, then coincidence, until the results repeated. Again, and again, and again. She brought the findings to Dr. Park immediately. This can't be right. Park studied the data for nearly an hour. Then she became very quiet. Show me navigation logs. By midnight, half the senior staff crowded into the research center. Patterns emerged rapidly. Escape attempts made during moments of panic failed more violently. Crews reporting confidence traveled farther. Groups that expected disaster encountered it more frequently. The room fell silent. Malik stared at the data. No. Dr. Park nodded slowly. I know. No. He pointed toward the display. You're telling me the universe runs on motivational speeches? Not exactly. Because if optimism turns out to be a measurable force of nature, I'm quitting science. Captain Torres looked toward the projections. What if the rift isn't trapping ships? Everyone turned toward her. What if it's trapping expectations? The room became perfectly silent. For thousands of years, every civilization entered the rift believing one thing: escape was impossible. Every failed expedition reinforced that belief. Every disappearance strengthened it. Entire societies inside Haven had spent generations teaching their children that leaving was impossible, not difficult, impossible, a prison built from certainty. Humanity had arrived carrying a dangerous assumption of its own. There had to be a way out, not because humans were smarter, not because they were stronger, simply because they had never been particularly good at accepting permanent impossibilities. Dr. Park looked up slowly. If we're right, Malik finished the sentence. Then we've been arguing with geography. No, Torres said quietly. She looked toward the darkness outside Haven. We've been arguing with belief. The first experiment began immediately. A shuttle volunteered for the test. Its crew consisted of 4 humans and one very confused member of Haven's council. Their instructions were simple. Do not calculate failure probabilities. Do not discuss risks. Do not monitor collapse scenarios. Focus entirely on arrival. The launch drew spectators from across Haven. Most attended out of curiosity. Some attended out of pity. Many attended because they had forgotten what hope looked like and wanted to remember. The shuttle disappeared into the darkness. Minutes passed, then hours. Silence filled the command center. Finally, sensors activated. The shuttle had returned. Further away than any vessel in recorded history had ever traveled toward the boundary. Not free, not yet, but farther. For the first time in thousands of years, the prison had moved. Celebrations erupted across Haven, not because they had succeeded, because impossibility had cracked. Even slightly, even temporarily, it had cracked. Captain Torres stood at Haven's central observation deck that evening. Below her, lights from millions of homes stretched across the station. Behind her, footsteps approached. Seraph, the older woman, stood beside her in silence. When I was young, Sarah said quietly, my mother told me stories about open skies. Torres listened. I thought they were myths. She looked toward the stars. I stopped believing in escape 300 years ago. The human captain smiled gently. We only need you to believe until tomorrow. Seraph laughed softly. You humans are exhausting. We hear that a lot. Far beyond Haven, deep within regions no ship had ever mapped, ancient structures awakened. Signals passed through forgotten networks. Massive objects shifted in the darkness, as if the rift itself was responding, watching, learning. Because for thousands of years, everyone who entered the prison had eventually accepted its rules. Humanity had done something new. Humanity had started changing them. And somewhere in the endless dark between stars, the impossible is beginning to become nervous. History rarely announces the moment it changes. There is no music, no dramatic pause, no voice in the heavens declaring that the impossible has just become possible. Usually, history changes quietly. A number shifts. A door opens. A line moves slightly farther than it did yesterday. The first successful test flight beyond previous limits traveled only another 300 kilometers. The second managed 800. The third reached nearly 4,000 before being forced to return. To an outsider, the progress looked insignificant. To the people trapped inside the rift, it felt like watching sunrise after centuries of darkness. For the first time in generations, maps were being updated outward instead of inward. For the first time in centuries, children in Haven began drawing stars they had never seen. For the first time in recorded memory, people started making plans for the future. The phrase spread through Haven quickly. Not if we leave. When we leave. That single word transformed entire civilizations. Factories reopened. Shipyards activated dormant construction platforms. Schools introduced astronomy courses about worlds that existed beyond the prison. Hope changed people. Humans had always known that. Now the trapped civilizations were learning it too. A year after humanity's arrival, the Odyssey's command center looked less like a military vessel and more like a university built inside a hurricane. Engineers argued with mathematicians. Physicists debated philosophers. Artists worked beside navigators. Musicians collaborated with communication specialists. None of it made sense. And somehow, that was exactly why it worked. Commander Sarah stared at one particularly chaotic meeting in disbelief. A human violinist stood beside a quantum engineer while discussing resonance patterns in subspace distortions. Nearby, a children's game designer argued with astrophysicists about movement prediction algorithms. "Explain this to me," Sarah finally said. Malik looked up from a pile of equations. "Which part? Why is the musician here?" She discovered repeating frequencies inside the distortion fields. Sarah blinked. "And the game designer?" He accidentally solved a navigation problem while creating puzzles for school children. She stared at him. "This is not how research works." Malik grinned. "Historically speaking, this is exactly how human research works." The breakthrough came on a quiet morning. No alarms, no celebration, just silence. Dr. Evelyn Park stared at the projection in front of her for nearly 10 minutes before speaking. "I found it." The room froze. A route appeared above the table. Not perfect, not stable, but real. For 37 seconds, a corridor formed through the rift leading toward known space. 37 seconds. Long enough for a signal to pass. Long enough for a ship traveling at sufficient speed. Long enough for hope. Captain Torres looked at the projection. "Can we hold it open?" Dr. Park hesitated. "We don't know." "Can we widen it?" "We don't know." "Can we make it permanent?" Park smiled tiredly. "You are becoming very human about this." Torres raised an eyebrow. "I am human." "Exactly." The news spread faster than anyone expected. Entire district of Haven erupted into celebration. Others reacted with fear. Not everyone wanted to leave. Some had been born inside the rift. Some had buried families there. Some no longer remembered life outside. Freedom terrified them almost as much as imprisonment. Humanity understood that too. No one would be forced to leave. The choice belonged to them. Always. 3 weeks later, representatives from every trapped civilization gathered aboard the Odyssey. The room contained species that had once fought wars against each other. Empires, republics, federations, cultures separated by thousands of years and countless misunderstandings. Captain Torres stood before them. "The first corridor won't stay open long." The room remained silent. "We don't know if a second opportunity will come." More silence. "We have enough time to evacuate everyone willing to go." A Varel representative stood. "And the ships that don't make it?" Torres met his eyes. "Then they don't make it." The room shifted uneasily. A military commander from another species spoke next. "You ask us to trust uncertainty. Torres nodded. Yes. The commander frowned. Why would we do that? The human captain considered the question carefully. Then she answered, because certainty is what trapped you here. No one argued. Construction began immediately. Every ship capable of flight prepared for departure. Old vessels were repaired. Ancient engines restarted. Generations of dust were cleared from forgotten hangars. Across Haven, families packed belongings they never thought would leave the station. Children asked questions their parents could not answer. What is rain? What does a real sky look like? How many stars can you see at once? Some questions made adults cry. The departure date arrived quietly. No celebrations, no speeches, only preparation. More than 18,000 vessels assembled near Haven, the largest convoy in galactic history. Millions of lives, thousands of years of waiting. One chance. Captain Torres looked out across the fleet from the bridge of the Odyssey. The display stretched beyond sensor range. Ships of every design imaginable. Elegant vessels from forgotten empires. Cargo ships older than nations. Exploration craft lost before humanity invented electricity. All waiting, all hoping, all afraid. Lieutenant Sato broke the silence. Captain? Yes. If this fails. She looked toward him. It might. The bridge grew quiet. Then she smiled. But that's never actually stopped us before. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. The launch began. One by one the ships entered formation. The Odyssey moved first. Behind her followed thousands of vessels carrying civilizations history had abandoned. Ahead lay the corridor. Invisible, fragile, impossible. Dr. Park watched the readings carefully. Corridor forming. The stars outside twisted. Darkness folded. Space itself seemed to inhale. Then it appeared. A pathway. A river of light cutting through the impossible geometry of the rift. Gasps echoed across the bridge. For the first time in history, the prison had opened a door. Move! Torres ordered. The convoy surged forward. For several minutes, everything worked. Ships accelerated through the corridor. Distances collapsed correctly. Navigation systems stabilized. The impossible held. Then the rift noticed. Alarms exploded across every vessel. The corridor began to shrink. Distortion spread across its edges. Entire sections collapsed into darkness. The route is destabilizing. Maintain formation, Torres shouted. Behind them, panic spread through the convoy. Ships broke ranks. Fear moved faster than light, and the rift responded. The corridor narrowed further. Captain Torres stared at the readings. The realization hit instantly. It wasn't reacting to movement. It was reacting to fear. Her eyes widened. Open every channel. The bridge obeyed. Millions of ships connected instantly. Every civilization listened. Every family listened. Every frightened child listened. Captain Elena Torres took a breath. Then she spoke. We do not move because success is guaranteed. Her voice echoed through the convoy. We move because someone has to try. The corridor stabilized slightly. She continued. We are afraid. No point denying it. Fear is normal. The distortion slowed. But fear does not decide where we stop. Across thousands of ships, crews listened. Families listened. Civilizations listened. We have spent our entire history walking into places we were told would destroy us. Storms, oceans, mountains, space itself. We did not survive because we were fearless. Her voice softened. We survived because we kept moving anyway. Something changed. Not in the fleet. In the rift. The corridor widened. Sensors across every vessel confirmed the same impossible reading. The pathway was growing stronger. Millions of people looked toward the light ahead. Not one ship turned back. Belief spread through the convoy. Not certainty. Belief. And for the first time in thousands of years, the rift bent in the opposite direction. Toward hope. Boundary approaching. Sato shouted. One ship crossed. Then another. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Signals exploded across assembly space. Sensors activated. Observatories confirmed impossible readings. Ships were emerging. Actual ships. From the rift. The first vessel belonged to a civilization declared extinct 1,100 years earlier. The second had vanished before the founding of the assembly itself. The third carried descendants of explorers whose names existed only on memorial walls. Across known space, people stopped breathing because history was arriving home. Back aboard the Odyssey, Captain Torres watched the final ships cross. Most made it. Some did not. The rift demanded its price. It always had. But this time, the price was not everything. As the Odyssey approached the boundary, alarms sounded once more. The corridor was collapsing behind them. Fast. Very fast. Malik looked up from engineering. Captain, she already knew there wasn't enough time. Not for everyone. Someone would have to stay behind and hold the stabilization arrays manually. The bridge fell silent because everyone knew exactly what that meant. Humanity had opened the door. Now humanity might become the reason it stayed open. And Captain Elena Torres quietly began calculating how many lives one ship was worth. The bridge of the Odyssey became silent. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of fear. The silence of mathematics. Cold. Precise. Unavoidable. Lieutenant Sato stared at the tactical display. The corridor was collapsing faster than predictions allowed. Sections of the pathway vanished every second. Distances twisted. Navigation markers disappeared. The door was closing, and it was closing behind them. Dr. Evelyn Park looked up from her station. Stabilization arrays need manual synchronization. Nobody asked the next question. They already knew. Automation wouldn't work. Remote control signals couldn't survive the distortions. Whoever stayed behind would have to operate the system directly. Inside the rift, alone, Captain Elena Torres studied the display quietly. How long? Malik answered. Long enough. Human beings had a remarkable habit of understanding incomplete sentences, especially the dangerous ones. Long enough for the fleet, not long enough for the operator. Torres nodded once. Understood. She reached for the command console. Then another voice interrupted. No. Everyone turned. Malik stood from a station. I built the stabilization system. Malik, I know the hardware better than anyone else on this ship. Dr. Park stood next. The synchronization sequence uses my equations. Sato followed. The navigation arrays require constant recalibration. Within seconds, half the bridge crew was standing, volunteering, arguing, competing, not over who got to live, over who got to stay behind. Sarah watched the exchange in disbelief. For centuries, she had studied civilizations. Empires protected leaders. Militaries protected specialists. Governments protected strategic assets. Humans appear to protect whoever happened to be standing nearby, even if that person was the entire galaxy. Torres raised her hand. The room fell quiet. No one is staying behind. Malik frowned. Captain, that's an order. The corridor won't survive. Then we'll find another solution. Sarah stared at her. Captain, there may not be another solution. Torres met her eyes. There usually isn't. She looked toward the collapsing pathway. Until there is. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Dr. Park suddenly froze. Her eyes widened. The convoy. Everyone looked toward her. What about it? Asked Sato. The corridor reacts to collective expectation. Understanding spread instantly. Fear weakened the route. Belief strengthened it. Not individual belief. Collective belief. Millions of minds. Millions of expectations. Millions of people traveling together. Malik slowly looked up. You think we can hold it open? Dr. Park shook her head. No. She smiled. I think they can. Within seconds, communication channels opened across the convoy. Millions listened. Again, Captain Torres spoke. Again, but this time the message was different. We need your help. Across thousands of vessels, confusion spread. The captain continued. The rift responds to what we believe is possible. Silence. We have spent generations teaching ourselves that impossible things stay impossible. More silence. Today we ask something difficult. Her voice softened. Believe anyway. Families held each other closer. Children looked toward stars they had never seen. Entire species remembered worlds they thought they would never visit again. Some remembered oceans. Some remembered mountains. Some remembered rain. For the first time in centuries, they allowed themselves to imagine arriving home. The effect was immediate. The corridor stabilized. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough. Sensors across the fleet confirmed the same impossible truth. Hope had measurable mass. The rift bent around it. Ship after ship crossed a boundary. Ancient exploration vessels emerged into assembly space. Rescue teams cried openly as forgotten crews stepped onto station platforms. Families separated by generations met descendants they never knew existed. History stopped being history. It became reunion. Commander Vieira stood among the crowds at Memorial Station 9. His eyes scanned every arriving vessel, one after another. Hours passed. Then a ship emerged from the darkness. Small, damaged, old, the Dawn Seeker. Vieira stopped breathing. The docking bay doors opened slowly. Crew members stepped forward cautiously, confused, overwhelmed, alive. Then he saw him, older by only weeks, not the century the galaxy had experienced. His brother looked up. Recognition crossed both faces instantly. Neither moved, neither spoke. Some emotions existed beyond language. Eventually, the younger brother smiled. "I think we got lost." Vieira laughed, then cried, then did both simultaneously. Across the station, similar scenes unfolded endlessly. Children met great-grandparents younger than their own parents. Civilizations welcomed citizens missing since before nations existed. Memorial walls stopped being monuments to death. They became waiting rooms that had finally emptied. Inside the rift, however, one ship remained. The Odyssey. Captain Torres watched the final civilian vessel disappear through the corridor. Sato checked the numbers. "That's everyone." Torres looked back toward the darkness. Not everyone. The realization came instantly. The stabilization arrays aboard abandoned relay stations throughout the corridor were still active, still holding, still waiting for operators that no longer existed. If they shut down too quickly, the route would collapse around the Odyssey. Malik looked toward the captain. "Looks like we're the last ones." Torres smiled slightly. Wouldn't feel right otherwise. For several minutes, they flew in silence. The corridor flickered around them. The rift pressed against reality from every direction. Waiting, watching. Then the boundary appeared. Known space. Home. Closer than any human had ever dared imagine. The Odyssey accelerated. Behind them, the corridor shattered. Ahead of them, stars returned. Real stars. Steady stars. Normal stars. The ship crossed a boundary seconds before the final pathway vanished. The rift closed. Silence returned. For the first time in 4,000 years. Nothing remained trapped beyond it. The galaxy erupted. Celebrations spread across hundreds of worlds. Assembly sessions suspended themselves spontaneously. Markets closed. Schools paused lessons. Entire cities gathered beneath the night sky, not to celebrate victory, to celebrate return. Weeks later, representatives from every rescued civilization gathered near the edge of the rift. A new monument stood there now, not a wall of names. A doorway, open, facing the stars. At its center were engraved the words, "No one left behind." Below them sat another inscription, the official statement of the Galactic Assembly. The region formerly designated as the Rift shall henceforth be known as the Passage of Return. The motion passed unanimously. For the first time in Assembly history, no debate occurred. Commander Sarah stood beside Captain Torres, overlooking the darkness that had once been a prison. "It still frightens me," Sarah admitted. Torres nodded. "Me too. You would enter it again, wouldn't you?" The human captain smiled. If someone was still inside, she looked toward the stars. Without hesitation, Seraph laughed quietly. "That is what confuses the galaxy about your species." Torres raised an eyebrow. "Only one thing? You run toward impossible situations. Sometimes, you challenge things specifically because they are impossible. Occasionally, you cross the most feared boundary in existence because someone you had never met might need help." Torres considered that. That one sounds accurate. Seraph looked back toward the stars. "My people spent centuries asking whether escape was possible." She turned toward the human captain. Humans asked a different question. Torres smiled. Who still needs a ride home? Years later, historians would debate exactly how humanity escaped the rift. Some argued it was mathematics. Others claimed psychology. Some believed consciousness itself influenced reality within the anomaly. No theory ever achieved consensus. The rescued civilizations offered a simpler explanation. The rift had spent thousands of years learning how to trap explorers. What it never learned was how to stop rescuers. And throughout the galaxy, children learned the story of the day humanity walked into the impossible and returned carrying millions with them. Not because they were stronger, not because they were smarter, but because somewhere deep inside the human spirit exists a stubborn refusal to abandon those waiting in the dark. And for the first time, the galaxy understood that humanity's greatest weapon had never been war. It had never been technology. It had never been courage. It was hope. Hope shared loudly enough that even the universe eventually listened. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human.